hotkey and then be a better gamer. Yes, that is right. Everything has been thrown into a touch of turmoil. For any of you wonderful, delightful, sexy, suave archive viewers who checked out part number 1, you may have seen some frame skipping. You may have detected some lag and some comments about lag at the end. And what we discovered together was that my internet was crapping out. So I just spent about 15 minutes fixing it live because I am a man that is inevitably having to satisfy my organism needs. I have to eat. So we're just going to be doing like a 20 to 25 minute part 2 and no part 3. Easy peasy. What we were looking at in part 1 was that Grubby was doing a very nice solid opening. He was doing this very excellent valuing of 2 bases, getting a lot of value out of it, getting the upgrades, getting the Colossus started early, and the last thing he's really done is get these warp gates. I actually think if we even back up like just a little bit, yeah, actually these warp gates have only had 1 production cycle of life. What we're about to see Sonky do is a ridiculously potent series of attacks. It really goes to show why it's so difficult to defend things on 3 bases. Right at the start, at least initially. Alright, so I went ahead and hit the wrong button. Cool, so I just rewound past all the important parts, but fortunately they happen at the 12-minute mark, so I can just rewind. Excellent. So Sonky's going to do this little sprint up here, and these are very deliberate numbers that Sonky uses. Harassment, very hard to spot coming unless you have control over the watchtowers, which there's no way Grubby would. Now the Colossi move down, and while that's going on, while this whole army's moving out here, oh no, there's a drop here. Oh no, there's a drop here. Sonky does this brilliant, like, infinity-pronged attack, and then loads up here and goes home. God, that's good. In part 1, you heard me talk a lot about how this didn't necessarily get you a lot of units quickly, or the medevac drop really, really quickly. But it does get you this very nicely timed 4 medevac harassment with enough units to fill them all up. So Grubby is, I think the technical term is boned. He is in not good shape. He's crying a little bit inside. Even though he puts up that front of being calm and looking like a total badass. You know what, I'm actually going to say it like it is. Even though he is a badass, you and me might not be so badass. We might be in this position just going freaking out. We have no more workers. We've lost 18. Now let's just go ahead and look at that number 18. Yeah, the number 18 gets increasingly close to twice 18. Grubby barely manages to defend this in time. In the units lost tab, we see that it's a lot of red and not very much blue. And we see Sonky trying his absolute best to ruin everything that is Grubby's day. Now this is a point in time where I would generally say it's time to give up. Very much so time to give up, time to tap out. And this is where generally we box things and go for some sort of all-in-ish style attack. But what we're going to see Grubby do is just play it out really calm. Obviously he's having a little bit of issues with the drops. But Grubby, first and foremost, is going to resecure some map control. This is always an important resource to try to gobble up. He's going to continue to go for upgrades. This is one of the most sensible things to do when you are a little bit behind. I mean, always you want to be getting upgrades, but when you're suddenly low on expansions, it's so tempting to build units, to expand, to do this and that. But no, Grubby is simply going to get this 2-2 upgrade. This is another way of allowing him to have a stronger army for whenever he's maxed. There's a lot of interesting dancing that happens around the max point, because even if I'm way behind, as long as I reach maxed, I know that he can only have equal or a smaller army. And you're seeing that Grubby is still doing this big valuing of stuff on 2 bases. This is a theme that's going to continue again and again and again throughout this mid-game. And still getting the blink up, still getting a lot of Colossi up, still having my roommates up. So I'm going to go ahead and shut my door. Ha! We're having a cooking party. We don't have parties. We just stay and play StarCraft. Well, it is a party, so cool. Just want to shut the noise out. Wah! Cool. Now, what you're going to see Grubby do is he's going to be making these very careful pokes from good angles. It's tempting to sort of try to drill down here hard, But Grubby now has Blink. He has a lot of force fields from these sentries. And that's going to be an increasingly important resource. And Grubby gets caught at kind of a weird angle, but this is the sort of force that most notably can actually retreat. We have a lot of force fields. We have Colossi that can climb up and down walls. We have Stalkers that can blink. If this were just a Zealot Colossus force, it might be a little bit more of a little struggle bear moment, but Grubby is doing his best just to poke. And something that I think is important to note, his army supply isn't that far behind Sonki's. Just because so much of this disparity in supply is for workers. I mean, obviously 81 to 129 is horrendous, but it's really easy to sort of misperceive quite how far you are behind. Sonki, I do think, probably could have, like, rushed in here and done a little bit more damage, but instead was focusing more on the drops. Trying to be aggressive. Ain't nothing wrong with that. So, what Grubby is going to be continuing to do throughout this point in time is that he is adding on Storm very quickly. This is going to be an important piece to the puzzle as we progress. Apologies for the alliteration. But notice how Grubby pulls all the way back. He doesn't do any of these suicide attacks, he just patiently pulls all the way back. Did leave some units behind for defense, has a nice Templar there for feedback. And this is the mode that Grubby wants to get into, which is where you have a lot of Templar, you have Storms, and you just have Templar peppering around everything. As long as Grubby can keep a good eye on the amount of expansions that Sonki's taking, and he can get enough Templar, he's going to be in good shape. For instance, right here, most players would just die. But thanks to Storm, Grubby's going to be able to repel this later on. Obviously, right now, his Storm isn't done. But it's so easy in a time like this to just give up. As we've seen, Grubby has lost a lot of expansions, and all of a sudden he's losing another attempt at a third. Don't just send your whole army down. Grubby is very responsible about just looking. Yeah, he botched that. He didn't cancel it. But Grubby's very responsible about just looking and seeing, can I kill that off? Yes or no? And if the answer is no, he literally just hangs out and stays. Grubby is now willing to move out because he does have the 2-2 upgrades done. And he's just taking another third expansion. In the meantime, Grubby has fleshed out his entire main infrastructure. 7 gateways in total. Blink up onto the high ground, storming all his own dudes. But at this point in time, I think Grubby would probably not benefit from getting a lot of upgrades right now. Probably what's going to end up being the best idea is to just keep drilling out a lot of units. This is going to give him the ability to put on some pressure, but more importantly, just build enough stuff to expand. Maybe as he's starting to get a 4th base up and running, or I should say started, can then begin adding on a little bit more. But these sorts of attacks, this is what makes the Templar really, really good to get somewhat quickly. We are seeing Sonki get a lot of ghosts up really, really fast. Or a lot of ghosts up, but not really, really fast. Notice the difference between those two statements. Sonki does have the ghosts, but they're late. They're not there in time to defend against the Templar. This is a very common pattern you'll see again and again and again. If you get smashed really hard early on, in Protoss versus Terran. You get smashed from a bunch of Medivacs, a bunch of Marine Marauder, and almost certainly your opponent's taking himself a 3rd base. If you rush for Templar really quickly in this spot, what you will end up seeing is that you can put pressure on in these types of spots. Your opponent doesn't have all those out so early. And Grubby is doing his best to only move in these small, confined areas where he can actually do damage. And suddenly Grubby's gotten his first chance to do this sort of pushback. The hidden hero in all of this are these upgrades. These 2-2 upgrades are really allowing Grubby to do far more damage than he really should seemingly be allowed to. At this point in time, the Zealot Templar choice is a very lean and mean and efficient mix to go for, but I think that it is completely ineffective without a good set of Blink Stalkers. And you're seeing Grubby still pull all the way back up here. Doesn't want to be too bold and have everything out in mid ready to take on the charge. He just got this expansion up. He just spotted his opponent having another expansion. Now, as he has enough energy for Storm, he's starting to get ready to move out a little bit more. But the best part about Ghosts, you really don't need that many to deal with a really big, scary army. But now here comes a very critical engagement throughout this entire game. We're about a little under halfway done. Yeesh, I better start speeding it up. Grubby just pulls back, storms, and pulls way left, and just abandons ship. Look at him just abandoning this expansion. He knows that the opponent is going to kill it. He knows Sonky's going to crush it. Trying to gain a little bit of map control. Very calmly pulls back, repositions his army in another nice spot. Sure, he ended up losing one expansion. He managed to get another one up, but just very calmly pulling back. A nice little pylon placement here to help deal with drops, but Grubby lost almost nothing in that expansion other than the Nexus itself. As we continue things right along, we see that Sonky has one of those classic armies of doom. And there's something that I talked a lot about in previous dailies where I was saying, do we want to take an expansion? Or do we want to attack an expansion? And where do we want to expand? Everything's about expansions right now. Where do we want to attack? Probably here, if he's going to be taking it. But more likely than not, our opponent is going to be just having this third up. I don't think there's a real need for Grubby to do a ton of attacking. Right now, Grubby should just be expanding and defending. And this sort of look, I want you burned into your head. This can hold off almost any drop at all. You'll notice Grubby hasn't built any Colossus for a long time, just those initial 3, and only now that he's starting to get back to the end game is he really going for it. There was a whole battle up here where Grubby just canceled the expansion. No big deal. The Blink Stalkers, I think, should definitely work their way into one of those backside arenas. There we go, now holding this Watchtower. The Blink Stalkers are your biggest friend at this point in time. Walking forward with these Stalkers, being really bold, seeing an army, blinking back and retreating. Don't blink forwards with them Blink Stalkers. Sonky doing, again, more really annoying drops. But this is the sort of organization that takes so much patience. So much patience. So our robotics facility is getting killed. We have a Colossus right here. Can we warp anything in? It looks like we have the ability to warp some stuff in. It is so tempting to go Zealot from these 2 gateways and to box this Colossus and go. But look at Grubby, he just hangs back, warps the 2 Zealots in far away, and then once all his Stalkers are up there, now he moves in. He manages to get one of the medevacs. But it's that kind of patience that is going to be saving Grubby so many units. Look at the units lost tab. Do you remember how huge a difference there was there earlier on? It's kind of the same theme that we're seeing over and over again, but there's that weird urge whenever you're playing to, oh my god, holy crap, oh, I need to go attack him right now because I'm behind and it's the only way I can win. There's no desperation in Grubby's eyes at all. And what did we see all of a sudden happen? We saw that this expansion kind of struggling to defend, and then we threw this one up, it just finished, boom, we're now building another one. I want you to envision yourself as a big spring when you are under a lot of pressure. The way the spring works has a lot to do with earlier on in the game. This is the loading the spring phase. When you're completely screwed, you've lost all your expansions, so what do? You get up everything that you need. Look at this. Robo with Colossus. We have Templar Archives. We have 2 Forges with 2 upgrades. We have 7 gateways. How are we doing on the Twilight Council upgrades? Well, we don't have legs at this point in time, so that's really it. So the way that this is going to feel is that he's pushing you down, but the only thing that you need to spend money on is units. Hell, he's even killed off a ton of your units, and you have more food, so you don't need to build pylons. You just need to build units. And what you can do is, over time, you suddenly explode into a ton more expansions. This is going to happen very rapidly once you get hold on it. And it's just amazing the way that Grubby just hung on. And then it's just sort of snapping back and forthward into things. You don't need a ton of Templar. I think it's, if you're under a ton of pressure, you can keep Templar, but mainly spread out. There are overall a lot of Templar out on the field. There's 7, but there's 2 down here. There's some in the middle. I believe that, yeah, there's one at the natural expansion. That sort of spread outedness is so key with the Templar. Love that. Liquid Hero does that all the time. And it's okay to even have like 10, 12 Templar just spread out around the map. Because if you can get off 2 storms like this, helps so much. Grubby completely sacrificing that expansion yet again. Letting this take a ton of damage. But once the engagement actually begins, Grubby is able to deal all the damage. And you know what's weird? Suddenly we're at a position where the game just actually does not look in that terrible a favor for Grubby. It's been looking terrible for so freaking long. Dropping, happening everywhere. But there's this stupidly good patience. I don't know how many more times I can say that, so I'm just going to go ahead and speed it up. So, okay, cool. Grubby repositions all his Templar around. Just leaving one back there. Just leaving one to Storm and a Pylon. A Pylon and a Templar is a great defense. A lot of Zealots and Templar popping up. And as his food starts to get higher, now we can start adding on more of those. This 3-3 upgrade, I think, is important to delay for a long time. Once the focus is on expanding a lot, then we should stop these upgrades. But now that it's about defending expansions and holding back, it's totally in line. Don't storm your own Templar. But again, envision yourself as the wonderful spring to everything. The longer you get pushed down, just keep holding, keep having patience, keep getting expansions, and as Grubby's darting back and forth and up and down, you'll notice that always as he's moving out in these patterns, it's helping to cover certain expansions that need covering. And I don't even necessarily mean in a, oh yeah, I want to kill off that thing that's there right now. It's a lot more of moving his army down to this south side while this bottom expansion was building. And see, just having one Templar there, it's so incredibly powerful. And as he's attacking down on this south side, very simple, taking the expansion behind. If he was moving up to this north side to hit this expansion, this is the place that he'd want to expand to. And again, this stupidly good patience where, yeah, we managed to kill off an expansion, so we're just going to walk home. And we're just going to hang out. I don't think that you necessarily want too much emphasis on the Zealot Archon. And I think that many are aware of the, when we get high on food, we want more Colossi, because that's a really great way to deal with ghosts. But I think that the Stalker, adding those on when you're at higher numbers, another really important thing to note. So at this point in time, yeah, look, just cancels it. Just defends what he can. Takes another expansion. There's like relentless expansioning going on. It's so easy to perceive expansions in that, oh yeah, this is part of the build. I took my third, but then he killed it, so, you know, I wasn't able to win. But Grubby's made an attempt to take an expansion so many times. Look at this. An actual blind expansion. This is technically terrible. This is actually technically one of the worst things you can do is just to take and expand. I don't know. Maybe there's an army here, maybe there isn't. Well, it looks like he can see it. I didn't know that. I didn't have any vision of it. Technically, this is terrible. But Grubby is illustrating an important point, which is that he is more than comfortable starting expansions and just canceling them. And losing 100 here, losing 100 there. First, I was like, Grubby should kill that Zealot off. It's Changeling. And then I realized I played too much StarCraft. So as these drops are happening, drops are always an investment as Terran. And there are more than a million examples of Grubby just pulling back, having patience, and sacrificing expansions, like sacrificing this one, sacrificing some stuff in the main so we can get his Stalkers there. But the important thing is to see how consistently he does it and how many opportunities there are to make big mistakes here. But he just freaking doesn't. Literally in a completely unwinnable position. Grubby is still hanging in. Still taking more expansions. Still having the patience to throw down another Nexus. And it doesn't work out. I'm going to throw down another Nexus. And pulling all the way back here. Oh. So good. And what we've seen pretty much for the last, I don't know, 15, 20 minutes of this game is nothing too unique about the compositions. In fact, there's only one unique element, the fact that this sentry has been constantly in this mix. Grubby may very well be the only Protoss that still builds a late-game sentry or two, just for that delightful Guardian Shield. But we're not seeing that much creative stuff in the compositions. It's largely Zealots, because we have a lot of money. Almost all of our gas is going to Templar and Colossus. As we get higher on food, we add in Stalkers and add in more Colossus. If we can't get Storms off, we make Templar. Those are pretty much all the rules that he's working with. But it's the fact that he's constantly pulling back, constantly trying to take more expands, has not even had the opportunity to check for this expansion yet. But what Grubby has done is just shut down this base and this base a lot. Watch this. Moving right to here, this little thing is another way of saying, managed that expansion. Cool. And Grubby's going to pop down here, and what's he going to see? Oh, managed this expansion. Excellent. So by taking this, I know I'm ahead in bases. Cool. Why is Grubby attacking up here? Because he's expanding up here. He's attacking along the same route that he expands, but in a super ultra cautious way. Look at that, moving the army forward and just sending his Zealot up to scout. Having some Templar smattered around. Oh, cool. Now he's going to move down here and take down this expansion, because in the late game, he just wants to manage expansions. Probably could have positioned his Zealots and Templar a little bit better, but the important thing is that he's moving along in these narrow alleyways, where the storm actually works very well. Rarely ever is he out in this open field, except at the start, which, though I think that putting pressure on is a generally good idea, I think it was perhaps a little teensy bit risky. Such a solid way to just deal a little bit of hurt. A little bit of storm dropping action. Or I guess I should say storm walking. Now, as Grubby is finally getting to the place where he's securing these bases, maybe 2 minutes ago to now, anywhere in that time frame, getting a Warp Prism and doing some storm drops. Any second earlier than now, I think would be a huge mistake. You have to keep your army together to defend that gigantic, ridiculous amount of aggression that's going on. So there was a drop here, but Grubby just feedbacked it with 2 Templar, warped in a handful of Zealots, and boom, completely and totally defended. I think the number of attacks that Grubby has done to Terran in this game is maybe 3. Maybe 3 total. If someone's really barreling down your front door, just don't go into mode. I don't think I'm actually saying anything new anymore. He got nuked and that's cool. But just the amount of patience here is kind of insane. If I had to state a theme of this moment, or of this game, it's that we're seeing the same idea played out really similarly. Or, excuse me, we're seeing an idea we've talked about again and again played out in a really different way. The simple idea is that all your decision-making in the mid and late game is about managing expansions. Should I be trying to expand right now, or should I be trying to shut down his expansions right now? We see that... Oh, that was good. We see that Grubby in this game wasn't really doing any of the big attacking. He was doing just defending. And since he was just defending, absurd amounts of expansions were going down, since he was just defending and expanding. Or since he was just largely defending, he was really focusing. Crap, I can't remember how I started the sentence. Focus is waning a bit. Trying again. Because he's focusing so much on defending, there we go, he's doing tons of expanding to go along with it. And only a couple times is he actually poking forward and looking around a little bit. The Templar were the huge key part to all that.
guys are exhausted.
And it's so easy to look at, you know, a ton of very typical looking games, and you'll see the Protoss trying to apply pressure to this third, and the Terrans maybe doing a little bit of poking and prodding back to Protoss, but Protoss has a pretty good lockdown with his big army. But in this game, Sankey was just balls to the wall aggression. And the game doesn't last that much longer, but I do want to point out that Sankey is a total class act. Sankey, who's doing his best to keep pushing back. Come on, Sankey. Says, good game, well played. What was my mistake? And just, okay, after Sankey loses this game, he says, man, I don't know what my mistake was. Can I add you for practice? Holy shit, that's the way you should think. Oh, that's awesome. That's like the exact opposite of being like, "Durr, I hate you. You jerk. You storm so imba." It's like, wow, how did that happen? That was so cool. Maybe it's good that that was a 2-part daily, because I think that Grubby is illustrating it better than words can. Just look at how, here's a different situation, but he's still patient. Here's a different situation, but he's still patient. Here's another different situation. He's still having a lot of patience. I'm just going to take 2 quick questions, because I actually do have to run to dinner, because I have to eat. I just really love food. Woo! Second Son says, Day 9, why wouldn't a strategy that works well when you're behind always work? Should something that works then work even better if you're even or ahead? I mean, that's absolutely true. There's no reason why what was happening in this game was only applicable because he was totally, completely screwed. With one exception. And that would be that all the investment that Sonky made in the drop at the start of the game that did all the damage, that says something about what Sonky can do now and what he can't do. The fact that he was able to do so much damage right then gives us some windows to do things like get Templar and not be that scared of ghosts. To do things like get extra gateways and not be that scared of a direct attack at the front. But the important thing to take away from it is less, this is what to do when you're behind, this is what to do when you're ahead. But it's instead to realize that in a lot of times when you're playing ahead, you're falling in line with a pattern you've done over and over and over again, that you've seen the pros do over and over again. And when you're way behind, it's easy to forget what the good techniques are, because when you fall behind, you're like, oh, I've never been here before, I don't know how to defend. And you box units, and you tell them to attack. But Grubby, we saw, just letting things die, collecting his stuff together. Letting stuff die, collecting his stuff together. Letting himself die and collecting stuff together. You almost certainly do that when you're ahead. But it's more along the lines of, nothing died, but I'm collecting all my stuff together. Yeah. Jackson says, Dear Day 9, why is it not really wise, or why is it not really wise to have sentry in the late game? I mean, having some sentries is good, but sentries work well for only a few reasons. One is force field, to just push stuff back, so like force field and Colossus works really well. Force field and Zealot to trap works really well. And they're great for the Guardian Shield, which you don't need a ton of sentries for. But the reason that you don't want a lot of them late game is twofold. One, you want to be spending your gas generally on other things like Templar, like upgrades that are a little bit more effective in the big numbers. The second thing is that force field rapidly diminishes in effectiveness with a lot of compositions. Like Zealot Archon, terrible with force fields. Your Zealots get trapped behind your force fields more often than not. And even if you could walk all the way up and force field behind his entire army, which would be pretty big, he could still load up into the Medivacs, and if you'd spent all that energy that you had on sentries instead on Archons, you'd still be slightly ahead. Yeah. Dana, where'd you get the honey you showed earlier? I got it from Ralph's up the street. I think I'm going to take this last question from SS Jdong, because Jdong was one of my favorite players in SC1. Said, wouldn't going Warp Prism to help harass in late game drops help stall for Grubby better? It actually would hurt him a lot, because it's one of those important moments where if we even come back to, let's say, where is it? Right here. At the 15-minute mark, let me actually try to see if we can load up 18. At this point in time, if we're Grubby, do we want to be taking expansions or do we want to be damaging his expansions? Envision for a moment that this we were able to defend. If Grubby moved out and Storm dropped this, what would the effect be? Well, he would maybe drop to 50 workers, down from 70. He'd still have 3 bases, he'd still have mules, and he'd still have a way huge army. It doesn't actually help us climb back ahead the way that a new expansion would. In particular, if we're going around doing all this harassment, we run a really huge risk of shooting ourselves in the foot with our own defense. We're trying to harass and expand, we'll probably die. If we're harassing and we're not expanding, now that's an area that, again, I'd still say, like just before, these thoughts are coming out in the wrong order. I'm going to try that one more time. Ha! This is what happens when I go even 15 minutes beyond an hour. My brain shuts down. What am I talking about? Oh, I know why my brain's not working, because I had state of the game before. I've been talking for hours. No wonder my brain sucks today. Let's try that one more time. If you are trying to take an expansion and defend it when you're behind, and you're trying to harass at the same time, you run the risk of just not having enough stuff in the middle of the map to defend his big push. You storm drop, kill workers, and then he just kills you. If you do what Grubby does, where you're defending with everything and taking an expansion, now there's a higher probability of you keeping that alive, and you can start to claw your way ahead. That leaves one more possibility, where we do the storm drop, but we don't expand. We just sit back and turtle. Sure, we'll be safe, but you have to ask yourself if the benefit that you would gain from doing that would actually put you in a winning position. Obviously, taking a full expansion is almost always better than trying to deal damage to his expansion. That's why when we were like, say, here, we're even in expansions. We are dead even in expansions, and in fact, both of us have a lot of expansions. So that means that if I actually do a storm drop and I take this out, this is going to be a real gain of workers. I mean, even if we're both at 70 and I do a storm drop and he drops to 60, that's a real gain that actually leaves us in a position where we're ahead. And it's very easy to just look at damage as being good in an absolute sense, but looking at what happened before and after and saying, well, was I winning before? No. Was I winning after? Still no. Then probably it's not a decision to make. Woo! I'm just going to leave, damn it. Fun Day Monday for next week. Submit to Monday at day9.tv. A game of you using your spine crawlers in your attack. Every attack has to involve spine crawlers in some way. Submit to Monday at day9.tv. For Newbie Tuesday, please send me a game that goes really, really late game where you give me your rank, your name, your league, all that jazz. And yeah, that goes really, really late game where you may or may not have had problems with attacking and expanding and getting the right late game composition, getting the right start to your late game, etc. I'm going to go because my brain is dead. Thank you, dear lovely viewers, for your beautiful patience. As much repetition as I did in that one cast, you were all so positive and supportive. How lovely. How lovely. Thank you.